This is a seismic shift in the global supply chain, occurring in real time. What we are witnessing is no longer confined to protests on the streets of Tehran, nor is it merely another chapter in the exhausted geopolitical playbook of US-Iran relations. When the White House announced a 25% tariff on any nation still conducting business with Iran, the fundamental physics of global trade underwent an irreversible mutation. This is not a sanction against a rogue state. This is a globally applied collective liability law. We are not here to engage in moral arbitration of who is right or wrong. We are here to dissect the cold, mechanical, economic logic behind this policy and how it is, with supreme irony, restructuring our reality. A world once committed to globalization is being forcibly torn into two parallel operating systems. Let's analyze the sequence of events. Iran experiences 2 weeks of internal unrest, technically a domestic affair. Washington's response, however, was immediate and asymmetric. Beyond military posturing, they deployed a nuclear-grade economic option. Pay close attention to the phrasing, any nation. With those two words, every neutral country, every ally, and every economy attempting to maintain standard energy trade was instantly placed in the docket. If you are India exporting rice and tea to secure essential oil supplies, if you are Europe attempting to salvage the remnants of humanitarian trade under a crumbling nuclear agreement, if you are Turkey managing vital cross-border commerce, as of yesterday, this was trade. As of today, it is punishable conduct. This 25% tariff is, in essence, a mandatory tax levied on the diplomatic sovereignty of independent nations. The message is binary and brutal. Neutrality is no longer an option. You either align with every granular detail of Washington's sanction regime, or you prepare to pay an exorbitant penalty for access to the American market. This is the evolution of long-arm jurisdiction to its absolute extreme. Previously, the U.S. utilized the SWIFT system to sever financial arteries control over the blood flow. Now, through universal tariff threats, it is a direct assault on the rice bowl. But what are the systemic consequences? This brings us to the core of the issue, the dilemma and inevitable resistance of the innocent bystander. First, look at the energy markets. This is the most direct transmission mechanism. Despite years of sanctions, Iran remains a critical stabilizer in global energy supply, often moving oil through shadow fleets and gray channels, particularly to Asian markets. If the U.S. enforces a blanket 25% tariff on all buyers, it strikes the buyer harder than the seller. For manufacturing giants in Asia dependent on energy imports, the equation is grim. Surging energy costs drive up manufacturing overheads. When manufacturing costs rise, the price of goods exported back to the United States rises. Observe the boomerang effect. The U.S. imposes tariffs on third parties to punish Iran. Those third parties face rising costs, both from tariffs and the need to source more expensive alternative energy, and ultimately pass that inflation back to the American consumer. It is a complex form of economic self-mutilation, yet in the face of hardline political signaling, the economic ledger is often ignored. Second, we are witnessing the physical bifurcation of global supply chains. For 40 years, we operated in a world that was effectively flat, governed by the efficiency principle. Production moved to where costs were lowest, goods moved to where demand was highest. That logic has been usurped by the security principle and the alignment principle. Consider the position of a CEO of a multinational logistics firm. Your primary risk is no longer maritime weather or labor strikes. It is the toxicity of uncertainty. If your vessel docks in an Iranian port, or if a single entity in your client portfolio has exposure to Iranian business, your entire supply chain faces American scrutiny and tariffs. This uncertainty is poison to commerce. To hedge against this, corporations are being forced to construct dual supply chains, a sanitized chain dedicated exclusively to the U.S. market, and a gray chain servicing non-U.S. markets. This destroys global efficiency and structurally inflates the cost of all commodities. The profound crisis, however, lies in the collapse of financial trust. This 25% tariff threat is, without hyperbole, the most potent accelerant for global de-dollarization we have seen to date. The US dollar's status as the world reserve currency is predicated on utility and safety. Nations hold dollars because they are liquid and universally accepted. But when utilizing the dollar or participating in a dollar-centric trade system becomes a political liability, neutral nations are forced to seek redundancy. Europe attempted this years ago with INS tax to bypass dollar settlements with Iran. It was clumsy and largely ineffective, but the seed of independence was planted. Now, as tariff cudgels are wielded indiscriminately, what is the calculus in Asia, the Middle East, or Latin America? They realize they must construct a parallel payment architecture that does not rely on the dollar or U.S. market permission. This is not about challenging hegemony out of spite. It is about survival. If India requires Iranian oil, it may be forced to abandon dollar settlements entirely, pivoting to the rupee, gold, or a basket of other currencies. Once this transaction volume reaches critical mass, it forms a closed-loop non-dollar trading sphere. Within this sphere, U.S. tariff threats are rendered impotent because the goods neither touch the U.S. financial system nor enter the U.S. market. The irony is palpable. The more the U.S. leverages its absolute dominance in the current system to enforce collective punishment, the more it compels the external world to accelerate the construction of a firewall, a new system, impervious to American influence. We must also scrutinize the geopolitical realignment. This indiscriminate tariff weaponization pushes nations that were previously pro-American, or at least committed to neutrality, into the opposing camp. For many developing nations, affordable energy and food are the bedrock of social stability. If Washington demands they sacrifice domestic stability for a geopolitical quarrel in the Middle East, the political cost is unsustainable. Consequently, we will see the rise of pragmatic, regional economic blocs. These alliances will be characterized by depoliticized trade. The logic will be simple. Regardless of ideology or internal unrest, if you have the supply and I have the capital, trade proceeds. These networks, based on pure pragmatism, are growing quietly outside the walls of American sanctions. Zoom out to the macro-historical view. History dictates that trade wars produce no victors, only varying degrees of the vanquished. For the United States, this strategy may project strength in the short term and extract tactical concessions. But strategically, it is eroding the U.S. credibility as the night watchman of global trade. When market access becomes this politicized and unpredictable, capital reacts instinctively. It diversifies risk. We are staring at a violent shift in global investment flows. Capital will no longer seek merely maximum profit. It will seek maximum political safety. Funds that should have flown to the most efficient enterprises will instead divert to those that are inefficient but geopolitically safe. This is a massive drag on global productivity. For small and medium-sized nations caught in the thresher, this is catastrophic. They lack the mass to sustain internal circulation and the leverage to negotiate exemptions. They are trapped, watching their currencies devalue and import prices skyrocket. This suffering is silent, but the accumulated resentment is the fuel for future geopolitical volatility. To summarize, this 25% tariff is not just a metric. It is a new nail in the coffin of globalization. It signals to the world that the era based on rules, free trade, and mutual exchange is receding. It is being replaced by an era of fragmentation defined by blocks, penalties, and mutual blockades. In this new era, the friction cost of business has spiked, and the viability of neutrality has collapsed. For the average individual, this geopolitical friction will manifest in gas station receipts, supermarket price tags, and the violent volatility of foreign exchange rates. Let this be a warning. The economic logic of the modern world is now entirely subservient to security logic. As an observer, you must understand that future investments and decisions can no longer rely solely on financial statements. They must be overlaid with the world map, because on that map, the trade routes that were once open are now mined with invisible political explosives. If you ask what comes next, watch the non-aligned nations. How they solve their payment issues and how they redraw their shipping routes will determine the architecture of the global economy for the next decade. We are witnessing the birth of a new, deeply divided world system. The labor pains have only just begun.